The Committee of the Whole is back in session. If I could, can I just ask us to rise in a moment of silence? Today would have been the birthday of our colleague, Senator Benn. His last session on this floor was presiding over this very issue, a police overtime. Thank you. We have one more department to address, and that's Guam Police Department. If we can bring them in, please. Go ahead, one of you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. While we're having GPD come in also, it was brought to our attention that there is outstanding overtime balances for the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency. If we can also request their representatives as well so that we can make sure we're addressing everybody equitably.
All right, their oversight, Customs and Quarantine Oversight Chair is not here, and they have their own funding source. It's not a general fund appropriation, so we would need to know what their funding source is and deal with them separately.
Thank you.
And it wasn't part of the request that came down from the front office.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman. I just would like, if we could have them come down and explain that to us, why they still have an outstanding overtime balance, what the funding source was supposed to have been, and whether or not that was depleted, and if it's adequate to meet the overtime needs of their officers, and if it's not, does it require a subsidy from the general fund?
If someone can find them, and I see Tello from the governor's office has just arrived, if somebody wants to talk to her about why it's not included in this bill and how we're going to address it, fine. Someone can call them. I need to get GPD, and I'd like to ask Senator Money Barnes to preside.
Thank you, Senator Mike St. Nicholas, for those comments. And I just want to share for the record that Senator Yamashita and I had concerns about that and talked to the chair. So hopefully we'll get the numbers in, and if we need to make any revisions or changes, we'll work on it accordingly. Do we have GPD in? Oh, Chief. My Sergeant of Arms, Mr. Can we swear Mr. Chief Perdalio in? Yeah. Okay. Tom.
Then I need for you to stand and raise your right hand.
Joe. Can you get my glasses? Jules Masi, Sergeant of Arms. Good morning, Chief Perdalio.
Good morning.
Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Chief Perdalio, the last time you were here on this overtime, on June the 16th, was it your testimony that the Guam Police Department needed 668,000, well, initially 600,000, but then with the interest, $668,000 to cover overtime for prior years?
Yes, Vice Speaker.
Have you seen the bill that was sent down by the governor?
Yes, I have.
On section 2 on the second page, it seems that there's a balance that's left in the 668?
Yes, there is, Vice Speaker.
Has everything from 2013 been paid?
Yes, Vice Speaker, according to my ASO, everything, and that's the balance. With the copy that I provided, 228,819, that everybody has a copy of this.
How or why did you ask for 600,000 when you only needed 400?
At the time, when we were requesting for the 600, and then plus, credit to, again, Senator Mike Nicholas adding in 68,000 more, we were relying on our ASO, our Administrative Service Officer, and our finance team at GPD. They're calculating a lot of the overtime submissions, and then what they see in the ASO, in the AS400, that's keyed in. And a lot of the kind of fluctuations with that number is when people call in sick leave or administrative leave, or put in administrative leave for training, and that converts some of overtime, claims towards straight time pay. So that can sometimes change the numbers there, Vice Speaker.
But when we met in June, all right? That was 8 months after the fiscal year closed.
Yes.
You testified that you needed 600,000 for the year before, for the prior year, not for outstanding for 2014.
Yeah, for FY13, FY13.
And in June, your ASO and your fiscal team were unable to determine that you needed only 400, not 600?
Well, at the time, they provided me the number of 600,000, in terms of what the overtime that is due for FY13, and I trusted my finance team, and of course, with this balance, again, I'm the one responsible. I'm held accountable for that, and I apologize on behalf of my finance team that provided me, those numbers. That I truly trusted their numbers, and they said they were accurate in the need for closing the books off on FY13 DEP obligations and
So
overtime.
8 months after we closed the books of 13, you were unable to adequately and correctly determine how much was owed for 2013, correct?
At that time, during the legislative hearing, when we went down there and we asked for the amount owed for FY13, we again, I said I was going by the numbers that my finance team, the payroll officers had indicated was owed for FY13. The number that was given to me was in the area of 600,000. I believe Senator Brant McCready, provided a bill to, pay that off, and then of course that increased Senator Mike Nicholas 68,000, and
Yeah, that was
at the
the
time, yeah.
interest on
yeah, the interest.
600,000.
Yeah. Yes.
It was very simple DI math, 10%.
Yeah.
But if we knew it was 400, then we would have only made it a $40,000 increase. But I'm still trying to
Yeah.
figure, we are now the 22nd of October. We just
Yes.
closed the books on 2014. 22 days. Can we trust the number that your ASO and you are now presenting to us is what you need for overtime?
Again, I trust the ASO working together with BBMAR and of course the figure, and I provided a copy of overtime of 1,497,709.23 for FY14, and this is according to what the Administrative Service Officer. She's not going to be able to make it here, but this is according to what overtime submissions have been put in there, and she's qualified with me. This number could be a little bit more or less. Again, there's always that possibility they could be a little bit off on those numbers, but that's the numbers they came up with in overtime submissions given to the
Do you remember
payroll office.
the committee of the whole on June the 16th? Do you remember testifying with your ASO that day for that special
Yes.
session?
Yes, Vice Speaker.
Do you remember what you testified as the need for overtime as of May?
Yeah.
We were in June, and what did you and your ASO testify you needed as of May, the month before that we had that hearing in June? What was your testimony?
My testimony is, I believe that, and I recall, and it's related to this Bill 41532 on the governor's request for $1.5 million to.
Do you remember what you guys testified was owed as of May for overtime for your department?
I don't remember exact numbers, but I remember, Ms.
Chief,
Nauta.
you've been testifying
I
in all
remember-
kinds of court
can-
hearings, and I'm
excuse
just
me, Vice
saying,
Speaker,
what
I
was
can-
it you
If I
testified?
can respond and just say that this is what I remember, that I do remember asking for flexibility, asking for giving the
No,
governor authority to,
What was the
pay
number
prior debt
you,
obligations.
what was the number you and your ASO said you needed
She-
in
okay,
May?
she did give an estimate that said that we would close the fiscal year FY14 with an encumbering $2 million of overtime.
Yes, but
Yeah.
what did she say you needed that you had accumulated as of May?
Okay,
2 weeks before we had the hearing.
Well, I have the numbers. It's according to the S400, we accumulated or paid out 703,776, and that's on this document over here. But at the same time, she was estimating we would close off the year by encumbering a total of about $2 million.
Let me remind you what your testimony was that day, because it was burned in my mind because I made an amendment on the floor to give you $2 million to pay the overtime for 14. All right?
Okay.
You and your ASO testified that you need, as of May, you needed $1.6 million. That was a testimony. It's been playing on the loop if you watch the legislative channel. That was the last hearing Senator Ben presided over. And if anybody out there is questioning it, they've heard it several times over the last couple of days. 1.6 was needed, and you figured that for June, July, and August, and September, you might run up another 300,000 or 400,000, and so conservatively, you guys thought you would need about $2 million. So I made the amendment on the floor to provide GPD $2 million in authorization, but it was objected to and it was voted down by the other side. Now we're here today with two sections for GPD. One that shows that we over-appropriated for 2013 because you guys were unable to correctly testify how much you needed for 13, 8 months after the fiscal year closed. And though in June, you testified that you were going to close the year out at $2 million worth of overtime, this bill is only asking for 1.5. What is it? What do you guys need?
We need the $1.5 million that the governor has proposed in this bill to cover the FY14 overtime, to close the books in the FY14. And I think the numbers are close in FY14, and I actually have the first and second quarter fiscal year FY14 overtime, and an estimate that Ovi Nauta placed down here. She said this was her estimate on the closing of the grand total for FY14. It's not $1.6 million as was indicated in that hearing that you said you recall, but $1,270,345.20, and I can provide a copy of this. This is our
It's not
ASO's
my
numbers.
testimony, and I'm
But-
just saying,
but
if
the total-
you
but-
testified
but-
like this
but-
in court,
but the
you'd be out.
But the Vice Speaker, that I do recall that even in that hearing, and you were asking, do I need $2 million? If I can recall, you were asking for FY15 budget, and I'm saying the discussion was on the
there were two
supplement
separate
for
hearings in June,
FY13.
Chief. We had a committee of the whole in here on a special session called on a bill by one of the members for $600,000. You were sitting on this side of of Senator Ben with Ovi. Her testimony, and you confirmed it for her, that as of May, for the first 8 months of the fiscal year, you needed $1.6 million. That's how much you guys had already accumulated as of that day. And when I asked how much more you would need for the rest of the year, you guys estimated that it would run to $2 million. I can run the tape because we've had it
Okay.
looping on
well,
TV.
Well, Vice Speaker, you know, in behalf of the men and women of the Guam Police Department and all the other law enforcement agencies that were here yesterday, you know, for the request, the governor's request, for GPD alone, the $1.5 million is sufficient to cover our FY14 DEP obligation. And I hope that the legislature here can cooperate. And again, as the bill does, provide and remove the limitation of using funds only for payment of prior year's overtime, so that we can pay this remaining balance that is owed to the of this $1,497,709 of overtime.
Do you remember in May and do you
encumbered.
remember in June at the Committee of the Whole and when we had the legislative hearing, when I asked you how are we going to pay for, because we asked you about your $2 million overtime even at your oversight hearing for your budget. I asked you several times. In fact, my staff went through it and counted 6 times I asked you. That doesn't include the number of times Senator Mike Limtiaco asked you. And I can recall, I kept saying, I will ask you again, Chief, how are you going to pay the $2 million that you owe your men and women in overtime? Oh, that'll be taken care of.
I think if you
There'll be transfer
Vice Spe-
authority and we
Vice
can
Speaker,
take care of it.
I think the funding sources for this bill, and this is the issue of today, this bill has been already sorted out with yesterday's hearing from DOA and the and GIDA. And I think the funding sources there, I think what's on the minds of the men and women who are owed this overtime,
The
that
governor has
the
transferred
$1.5
money
million
into the
is
department,
sufficient
hasn't he?
enough to pay them
In
the
the
overtime
past,
that's
hasn't
due.
the governor transferred money into your department to pay overtime?
We
In
have,
fact, in
we-
13,
for-
I remember the same week that one of the other members introduced legislation to put advertising in buses. I remember and I saw the transfer of $100,000 from bus operations to GPD for overtime. So I know the governor has the authority, and we've given him 15% authority. He had plenty of money in August and September. There was a $50 million windfall out with Section 30.
Well, I'm not going to.
Did you make a
Vice
request
Speaker,
in August?
I'm not gonna, Vice Speaker, I can't speak on behalf of the governor's finance team, but they've been doing a great job in coordinating with our administrative service officer, myself, when we talk about how we can search for funds to ensure that we cover, that we make sure that all our obligations are paid for in an entire fiscal year. And as I said in that last public hearing, every single cent that an officer has earned in terms of overtime will be paid to them. And the
Okay.
governor's committed.
So
and I think
maybe
even
I'll
this
do this,
legislature is
what I did
committed
the same
to
thing with
make
the
sure that every
hospital.
cent is paid to each officer,
Madam
men and
Chair,
women.
can the chief provide the committee with a copy of all the email correspondence he's had with the front office asking for overtime money over the last year?
Would you
Okay.
please provide the document? So
And
it's
we'll be able to work
within
on
this year? Or
During
the whole fiscal year, fiscal
between
year
the entire fiscal year 14,
14? Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to see every single email request to the front office saying, we've accumulated in October of 2013, 100,000. We need 100,000 for overtime. October, whatever the numbers were, and 1.6 last May. Whatever the numbers were, I need to know how often you, as the chief, have been pestering the front office to provide you and the men and women in blue transferred money from wherever else they could find it to make these payments because we tried to give it to you. In June. And in fact, I ended the hearing with, I can bet that we're going to be here the week before the election saying we need to pay the overtime. I wanted to prevent this political farce by appropriating it in June. Oh no, we can take care of it, we can take care of it. So, Chief, if we give the amounts that you have here in this document for the overtime, is it your testimony today that if this is insufficient, the amount that you have here, that if there is any outstanding overtime for 2014 that is not here, that we can take it out of your salary?
Speaker, I know you, Vice Speaker, you asked that question in a hearing about taking it out of my salary. I mean, you have the purse strings and the ability to make appropriations. And I'm not gonna, you know, out of respect, I'm not gonna get into an issue about the salary I have. I do like to compliment Senator Ada working with the governor in terms of bill about looking at chief of police salaries, you know, and looking at
That's not my
at the
question.
situation, but
My question is,
Vice Speaker,
when we
can,
try to appropriate,
I'm
I
just
need
asking
to
if
know
we
how
can,
much.
if we can just, you know, concentrate on the issue.
I am trying to concentrate
that our
on the
that
issue,
our
Mr.
police
Mr.
officers, our
Fidelio.
men and women, you know, worked overtime. They're owed $1.4 million in overtime have been worked, which translates to 40,571 hours of work.
to provide you with
And they're
all
just
that
requesting,
authority
and they're
in
just
June.
requesting that the legislature
Point of order, Madam
the
Chair.
governors.
Please, when a member of this body is speaking, I would request that the individual who is at the table providing information and responding, please allow that individual to speak. And likewise, that respect will be extended, please.
Okay. So when you speak, I'll make sure he does.
The amount that you needed, we just need to know. When you and your ASO testified in June, on June 16, you needed 1.6 and you would need 2 million by the end of the year, I made the motion. I made the motion to amend the law to increase the 600,000 by 2 million. It was defeated. Now I just need to know, what number can I give you? What number can I be assured is going to be sufficient?
And I'm giving you a response, Vice Speaker, $1.5 million that the governor has identified here, that funding has been identified from previous testimony yesterday, would be sufficient enough to cover the FY14 DEP obligation of overtime worked by dedicated members of the Guam Police Department, both civilian and sworn officers.
Nobody's questioning that they're owed it. We've been trying and trying and trying. I'm just asking, how many times do we have to come back because you and your ASO can't give us a number that we can depend on? Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Senator McCready?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Chief, welcome, and your hard-working officers as well, welcome outside. You know, this has been a long-standing issue, and I think our approach to this should be a long-term solution, rather than come in here every year or twice a year and appropriate prior year overtime or prior year obligations. So and I asked the question to the past chiefs who testified before this committee yesterday. We're talking about 280 officers that are owed overtime?
280 is an estimate of police officers, to include some civilians, probably about 40
So
40
how many civilians are getting overtime?
Probably about 40 civilians,
40
in
civilians.
the department. They're non-exempt civilians who work in different areas that helped out in some certain
Now,
aspects of the.
At 280 officers, is that inclusive of the reserve officers that you've sworn in and part of the cycle that the legislature appropriated in the last budget? Is that-
No, not to my knowledge, not
Okay,
any
so
reserves.
you still have a cycle that is pending?
We just graduated 14 new police trainees right now.
Full-time
who
police
just have
officers?
Full-time police
Okay,
officers that enter
14.
into. Yes.
How about reserves? How many reserves are?
Reserves, there's an estimate of 120 reserves. We just graduated 21, about 21 police reserve officers about 4 weeks ago.
So
last
does this 280, I don't think it reflects the 14? So it's 280 plus 14 right now,
month.
currently?
Yes.
Okay.
That's-
So we have 280 plus 14. Any attrition, any retirements recently? Anyone leave the police department?
There's been some retirements.
Recently, there's about 3, right?
Recently, probably about 3 or 4
3 or
retirements
4.
right now.
Okay, so we have roughly close to 300, more like 294, 295.
Yeah.
Now, in order for us to mitigate this problem and completely, well, I wouldn't say completely, but to eliminate this huge burden of overtime every year, we're going to have to hire new police officers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What uniformed police officer would be the easiest to hire right now? Would the pool of the 120 reserves be the easiest low-hanging fruit to get them on the streets right now, boots on the
Yes,
ground?
that would be the easiest.
Okay. So in order to do that, we must prioritize the hiring of new police officers. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So what I'm asking for is a public commitment from you. Obviously, there's an election coming up,
Yeah.
and from this body, it could change. I don't know if I'll be here next year. I'll assume you're the police chief
Yes.
next year. Can I get a commitment from you that we would prioritize at least 50 new officers from this 120 pool? Because if you look at the overtime right now, and we're going to pay you guys about 1.4 million in base overtime, and then when you add, I had the paper with me, but then when you add all the night diff and all the extras, it comes out to about 2,336,96213. Correct? Roughly about $2.4 million.
That's correct.
Roughly about
That's
2.4
correct.
million. Total paid out in overtime is to date is 703, about almost 704.
That's correct. That's from the AS400.
Okay, so if we take this $2.3 million and we use that to prioritize hiring of the 120 reservists in the next fiscal year budget, correct?
Correct.
Would we get closer to almost eliminating overtime completely? Would
That's accurate. We'd be close to offering that kind of leeway to potentially reduce overtime because you have more of a manpower that will be able to cover.
And would it be in
Some
the
of the
best
demands.
interest of the entire police department and our community and the safety of our community to take that $2.4 million, something that is time-tested and we know that it's going to be around $2 million every year, to invest that, not to spend it, but to
Yeah.
invest it in hiring from this 120 pool of reserve officers, boots on the ground, new men and women in uniform, to assist the current crop of officers that we have today?
Yes, Senator McCready, that's the right direction to take.
That's the right direction that we're going in. So can I ask you for a commitment on this floor publicly that if you are the chief next year, when we are in budget session, could we prioritize that we use this overtime money to put more officers on the street, to make sure that we get as close, and I know we're headed that way. I know we're trying to right-size this police department with officers, but can we prioritize when we talk about funding, can we prioritize at least 50 new officers from that 120 pool. Can we get that commitment from you that we would use that money to put our officers where they belong?
Yes, Senator McCready, you have my commitment on that.
Thank you, because that's very important, because we're going to keep going down this road. And I know this is not one silver bullet that's going to solve all the police department's problems with one budget. I think it's going to take much more than one budget, 1, 2, or 3 years. We are headed, I think, in a better place with the Guam Police Department, but we're not nearly close to where we need to be. And I think the support from this body, obviously you're going to have to answer some tough questions when it comes to finances. But there's no doubt that the men and women in uniform carry the cross and carry the full load of the safety of our island. And we deserve to pay them every red cent. I've said that many times before. And so I think that we need to effectively identify the light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe it's not as close as where we want it to be, but we must put more police officers on the street at a higher level. We need about 500 police officers total throughout the agency to make sure we're fully staffed. Is that right?
That's right, there, Senator.
And I think with your commitment, at least we know that we can hopefully expect maybe 50 or 60 officers through the budget process next year. And I thank you for that. And I continue to support you. I know it's tough. I know it's very tough being the chief of police. I support your department. I've been doing it since the beginning. And we got to continue to work together to find whatever means necessary to make sure that you guys keep this community safe. So thank you very much. And Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator McCready. Next up to speak on the agenda, Senator San Nicolas, and then I'll go back to the Vice Speaker.
Thank
Senator
you.
Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Chief.
Good morning, Senator San Nicolas.
I want to first start off by saying that we're absolutely committed to paying the overtime for these officers, just as we were absolutely committed to paying their overtime back in June. What I just find incredibly disturbing about how everything is unfolding is back in June when we ask about this,
Yes.
we're told, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be taken care of, when we're ready to make the amendment on the floor to take care of it. And then now we're here, of course, trying to take care of it, but when the Democratic part of the body is asking to make the amendment to take care of it, you as chief discourage us from doing it, and the only time you come down here and encourage us to do it is when it's coming down from the governor's office. So, you know, I just, when it comes to paying our police officers, it shouldn't be about who's asking. It should be about what's owed. And if we could have appropriated this back in June to take care of it, I think we really should have. What has me just all bothered about how we're going about this is, if we had identified those numbers appropriately and funded these overtime expenditures in the budget, then we wouldn't have to go around raiding the GVB reserves, for example, because that's what this bill is proposing, that we take money from GVB, and those reserves are supposed to kind of be our parachute in the event that tourism starts to decline and we need to inject marketing money to keep our economy alive. So if we had addressed this prior to the closure of the budget season and budgeted for it, we wouldn't have to be entertaining an idea of raiding the tourist attraction fund. You know, but again, when we had the conversation with respect to the budget, and the question was asked about, you know, are we going to need an additional $2 million for the overtime? I remember in the hearing, you stated that you were given a limit as per BBMR. They gave you a limit to what you could ask for in your budget. And so I just find this whole dialogue about, you know, can you make a commitment to hire people? I mean, you can make all the commitments you want, but if BBMR is only going to limit you so much, as they did last time, you're not going to be able to follow through on that commitment, are you?
Well, again, like I said, I addressed that there's always everything behind the hiring is, of course, funding and resources found, and funding resources. In terms of terms of the human resources that have been identified, you know, like reservists that have been already trained, have the qualifications, That's what I'm saying in terms of, there's already a pool of them already. And that's why I'm saying, in terms of human resources and the number of people we train and exceeding 120 reservists now, you know, as part of GP, part of our family, that's where it's easy. The challenge, the hard part again, in making sure I meet that commitment is backing up with funding to keep them in Government Guam, employing them. Because there are other priorities too, the government too, that would be looked at, as you pointed out, tourism, health, and education, and everything else in
Yeah,
the government.
but I mean, you know, for me, what I want to make sure of is that when it comes to paying our people,
Yeah.
whether it's our police officers or all of our people,
Yeah.
it really shouldn't be about who's asking, and it shouldn't be about what season it's at, or when's the election. It really should be about what do we owe and how can we go about paying it the most appropriate way. And if
I
we
agree.
knew back in June that we would owe up to $2 million,
Yeah.
and if we knew that going all through the budget process and we never addressed it then, which would have been the appropriate time, only for us to be addressing it now, I mean, it doesn't send the right message to the community. It doesn't send the right message to our public safety agencies that, you know, that we're willing to pick them up and toss them around like a political football. You know, it totally sends the wrong message. We could have done this back in the budget season, and we really should have. And the reason why is because this is an operational expense, right? We're taking this money from the Tourist Attraction Fund or from the surplus of the bond that the surplus money that's left over from that bond. That money is those are one-time funding sources. But in order for us to properly budget for this, we need to do it based on the mindset that it's going to be a potentially recurring expenditure. And so, of course, the budget would have been a more appropriate time, because when you raid one-time available resources of funds and you increase your recurring expenditures without factoring those kind of recurring expenses in, what are we going to do next fiscal year? And what comes to mind immediately for me is that in this last budget, we appropriated an additional $3 million for more hiring. And this isn't hiring in GPD or DOC or the fire department. This is hiring in agencies that have nothing to do with public safety. And that $3 million could have gone to be a funding source to pay for the recurring expense of overtime that we're likely to see, or to pay for more officers or more fire department personnel, or more corrections officers to reduce the overtime cost. But instead, the money was appropriated to do hiring in other agencies. If we had addressed this in the budget as we requested to address it in the budget, then maybe we wouldn't have gone off and hired more. We would have actually paid the people that were already working that were owed the money. So, you know, I would like to ask you for a commitment that we don't wait until after the fact to be looking for money in the dark corners of where we might find something left over. We need to budget for overtime appropriately by factoring it into the overall personnel costs and putting it into the budget that we appropriate for the entire government of Guam. Our police officers, our corrections officers, and our firefighters, this should have been taken care of when we passed the budget and it was signed into law. And now we run the risk of having to tap into Tourist Attraction Fund money that we may regret 6 to 9 months from now when we're looking for a reserve to kind of juice up our economy in the event that things slow down. I did have one question also with respect to the reservists. Have they been receiving all of their stipends?
They're still due some of their stipends. There's been some payouts that were made for the reserve stipend that I was briefed. I had that number with me yesterday, but the administrative service officer, I can have her send you the report of what, to update how much reserve stipends has been made. But not all of the stipends that are owed have been paid, but some stipends have been paid.
Okay,
to
because
reserves.
on the topic of making sure that we're making everybody whole,
That's right.
we need to pay the reservists their stipends. So if you can get us that number so that we can factor that into this whole calculation here.
Okay.
And another question I had, because, you know, the Vice Speaker was going back and forth with the numbers, and I really appreciated that because, you know, the last time we were here to talk about the 600,000, and then you said, you know, that the calculations were off and you know, we had some leftover money. You mentioned it's 228,000 that's left over from that total amount.
That's correct.
Now, you know, I can understand if Because that's 2013. That
Yeah.
was about 2 fiscal years ago.
Yes.
I can understand if like there's some variance in the numbers, but really that should have been firmly reconciled by the time we got to that point.
Yeah.
And for us to be off by 200,000 on a $600,000 appropriation is pretty dramatic. That's a 30% variance on something that's 2 fiscal years old.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm very concerned because I can understand a 10% variance maybe, but you guys are supposed to be reconciling those OT numbers on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about people's pay, so it really shouldn't be an estimate. We really should know what we owe our people on an almost real-time basis. And for us to have closed the fiscal year out and then to go in another 8 months and be 30% off, it's kind of like, whoa, are we even keeping track of what we're supposed to pay our people? You know, so I just want to make that statement because, you know, this 1.5 million I'm going to assume is accurate, but
Yeah.
again, you know, we really should, a 30% variance is way too much if we're really on top of keeping track of what we owe people. So my question is, if the $1,497,000 is what you need, what I'm concerned about in the bill and what I don't understand is, in the governor's version, he wants to strike out the words prior years on the $668,000 that was appropriated, meaning he wants to free up that additional $228,000 for overtime. Now, if we took care of 2013 already, and if this 1.4 million is supposed to take care of 2014, then what is that extra $228,000 supposed to take care of?
I believe, and I'm speculating, this is because, remember when I said this 1,497,709.23? It could be a little bit more or less. And again, as you had mentioned, just try and make the effort to make sure we get an accurate number with my payroll people, my ASO, the commitment to get more effort made to make sure we're getting an accurate figure and that we're not short on that or we're not going over on that amount. And that's why I'm saying with the 1.5 million, I'm just assuming and speculating that the extra free up of that 238 balance would be going toward the overtime, just in case it's a little bit more than 1,497,709 on that number, because administrative service officer did say, even though she's saying that's the overtime, for the total FY14, it could be just, there might be a little bit less or over on that amount there.
Well, that still concerns me, Chief, because
Yeah.
that's a 20% variance again. You know, how can we have a 20% variance on pay?
Yeah.
You know, we should be reconciling people's pay on the pay period.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to say that you're asking for 1.5 million plus just toss in an extra 200 just in case, you know, it's not like we're trying to hit a moving target. This
Yeah.
is a fiscal year that's already closed.
Yeah.
You know, all those pay periods have already expired. Why are we not reconciling overtime
Yeah.
on a real-time basis?
Yeah. And I think we're trying to make that effort to make sure we look at our procedures and our systems in place with the amount of payroll employees that we have working on the books and coordinating their numbers and coordinating their numbers and seeing what DOA has in their AS400 and comparing some of those figures and OT submissions.
Because my concern is that if we're not actively reconciling overtime on a real-time basis, that means that
Yeah.
the practice is already set up for us not to be paying overtime on a timely basis.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can close the fiscal year out and be 21 days into the next fiscal year, and we still haven't fully reconciled OT for the last year,
Yeah.
that means that we haven't been acting in a fashion that was with the intent to actually pay it on time. You know, if overtime is something that we're supposed to pay on time, then it should be reconciled almost immediately, and we should be ready to cut that check right away.
Yeah.
You know, but if in 2013 we had a 30% variance, and now in 2014 we're leaving the door open for a 20% variance, we're basically communicating to all of our police officers is the practices that we have ongoing for reconciling your overtime are not on a real-time basis, and so, you know, OT is
Yeah.
going to come when it's going to come. And for me, I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think it's legal. You know, from a Department of Labor perspective, when people are actually owed the overtime, they're supposed to be paid it. So if we're not reconciling it on a real-time basis, that's telling me that we're not interested in paying it on a real-time basis.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I'm confused because how are we certifying the overtime, and how is it not getting recorded in a way where it's being real-time, on a real-time basis? I mean, if we're doing payroll real-time,
Yeah.
shouldn't overtime be real-time as well? I mean, how are the overtime hours being kept off balance sheet where it's not reconciling directly with the wages that are earned by the officers?
I think the payroll and our finance people over at GPD, to include Department of Administration and BBMR when we're looking at overtime generated, not just our department, every department, they're using the best tools that they can use to ensure that they get some accurate numbers and making sure things are reconciled in terms of the financial figures there of overtime encumbered by each agency, especially with the Guam Police Department, because we have a lot of critical missions that require overtime, and some of them really, as I said, emergency, justifiable for emergency situations, storms, and everything else. And so, I just say, Senator, just trying to make the best effort. But I agree with you in terms of that we want to get to make it perfect, because I've been in the police department for 28 years. I've had my overtime checks banked. They called it banking way back, and it's not perfect. We want our overtime exactly right after we worked it, like in the business sector. Once you work your overtime, you get paid that overtime. But, it's been I would describe as a wicked problem, of trying to meet the challenge of making sure your overtime checks are paid exactly right after the pay period you worked it.
It definitely should get paid right after.
Yeah.
But in order for that to even happen, it needs to be reconciled right after.
That's right.
And for us to be having this moving target of, it
Yeah.
might be this or it might be that means that it's not being reconciled right after the pay period.
Yeah.
We should be able to pick up the phone at the end of every single pay period and say, what's the accrued overtime?
Yeah.
Every single pay period. It should be, like clockwork, like every other hourly pay issue. But for us to not even know what the potential overtime might be means we're not reconciling at the end of the pay period, and that's very disturbing for me. I think that even putting that on the record and making that known is, I think that's a serious operational issue that needs to be addressed.
Well
And
said.
it's not just something that's communicated from you, but also when we had a discussion earlier with some of the other public safety supervisors, it's become apparent that there is an issue with us actually getting this overtime reconciled on a timely basis. And so if we want to be paying our people on time, we need to be reconciling it on time.
Yes.
And we cannot have a 20-30% variance on the amounts.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, Chief, is 1.5 million, you're fairly certain you need,
Yeah.
but you may need an additional $200,000 to cover that,
With that balance, yes.
the balance.
Yeah.
Now, how much was appropriated for overtime for 2015?
2015, 900, I believe, 958,385 for FY 2015.
So we're going to go from an overtime bill for 2014 of up to 1.7 million, and you're saying that we're going to have OT of only 958,000 budgeted for FY 2015. So we're going to be, that's another $800,000 in FY 2015 that is out there. Are we going to need more money for overtime for 2015?
I believe just with the size of the GPD right now as it is, and we need hiring of more officers, 900 the budget request of 915 could amount to a shortfall by the end of the fiscal year of FY 2015. So yes, definitely more revenues. Anything can happen that might drum up and spike up overtime to make us go over this 900 some thousand and overtime that we were budgeted for in FY 15.
How many officers did we have in FY 2014?
I think we had about 300, it's fluctuating between 300 and 2 officers, full-time sworn police officers.
How many do we have for FY 2015?
Right now, we have, I think we're at 296 or 296, because some individuals retired. from
So
the
we
police
we
department.
pretty much have the same amount of officers in 2015 as we did in 2014.
Yeah.
But our overtime budget for 2014 that we know we're going to need to pay is somewhere from 1.5 to 1.7. And the budget that we have for 2015 is only 958.
958
So
thousand.
we can
Yeah.
pretty much,
Yeah.
assuming that we don't bring in, 50 to 100 new officers, we're going to need to come up with another 800,000.
That's a possibility, yes.
Okay.
Amount of
So, and the
overtime.
reason why I'm asking this is because I think that in this whole exercise, we perhaps need to go and factor in not only what we need to appropriate for overtime for 2014, but we need to make sure that you're gonna have enough money for 2015, because
Yeah.
the last thing we need is for overtime to not be getting reconciled in 2015, and officers having to wait until maybe even 2 years, because the next
Yeah.
election isn't 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Maybe a year and 50 weeks before they get a fancy bill thrown in again to pay them all their back overtime and come to their rescue. We need to stop doing that to these people. So, Madam Chair, I think what we're gonna have to explore is also, aside from these numbers that are provided by the chief with respect to 2014, identifying the necessary funds to be able to make good for 2015, because clearly, with only 300 officers in 2014, if OT is now at 1.7 perhaps, and the same amount of officers for 2015, and the budget only at 900,000, we're short. So we need to come up with that. And again, Chief, this is another thing that I'd like you to make a commitment on, and that's why we kind of had a very animated exchange back in that hearing.
Yeah.
And I do respect you, Chief. I want you to know that, but it's these numbers.
Yes.
When these numbers jump out at me, I need to really get into the meat of the numbers. And so I'd like to just ask that even if BB tells you, no, you only have this much, if you know it's going to be higher,
Yeah.
we need to know that.
Okay.
Because that way, when we budget, I would have much rather have put $800,000 into the FY 2015 overtime budget for GPD than to go out and say to the government, go out and hire more people because we have an extra $3 million. We shouldn't be hiring more people when we can't even pay our own people their overtime. That's pretty basic for me, and I think that if the general public understood that, it would be pretty basic for them too. Don't go out and hire more people until you're able to pay the overtime that you're already accruing, unless you're hiring to reduce that overtime expense.
Yeah.
But those hires for that $3 million is not reducing the overtime expense to GPD. So we really need to come to terms on that. I think we can. I think that this dialogue is going to be very healthy going into FY 2016.
Yeah.
But Madam Chair, again, I think that this is something that we're going to have to reconcile for the FY 2015 budget. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sen.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Vice Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you. Chief, you gave us a one-page sheet. At the top says Guam Police Department FY 14 paid and outstanding overtime.
Yes.
Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. In that, you have pay periods for, one pay period for 2012, and that was paid, right?
For 32,000 on top.
Oh,
Yes.
FY,
Yeah.
2012.
the 703,776. 44,
Okay.
is that what you're talking about?
And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pay periods in 2013 that you have on this sheet.
Yes.
Is that correct? It's at the top of the page.
Oh, yes. I see that.
Now, on the far left, after the total, would you please read into the record when those were paid?
The far left, 12, December 28? The far right?
The far right.
April
Paid, April 19, 2014.
So the last pay period for 2013 of $67,059 was paid on April the 19th of 2014, right? According to this sheet?
The pay of, on April 19, 2014?
13.
Oh, 13.
Yes, 67,059. Right there. 60,000.
The 67,000,
Yeah.
5964? Oh, December 28, 2013 you're talking about? Yes.
Yeah. So that was paid on April the 19th, 2014.
Yes, yes.
The last time we were in here was June the 16th, right? 2014?
June, yes. Yes, yes, Vice Speaker.
What prior year was outstanding? It was all paid on this sheet. Am I reading it incorrectly?
Yes, everything was paid.
And we're talking about FY 14. What's outstanding in FY 14?
When we met in June of 2014, we were trying to deal with outstanding obligations for the 2013 pay period,
That's
right?
correct, yeah. For FY 13, to close off the FY 13 outstanding debt obligations for overtime. That's what we were meeting for.
And when would the last pay period of FY 2013 be?
Let me check with
September.
It would be
Yeah,
September
September.
of
Yeah.
2013,
Yeah, 20.
right?
the ending. That's the ending of the fiscal year. Yes.
Yeah. So when you paid 10/19/2013, 11/2/2013, 11/16/2013, 11/30/2013, 12/14/2013, and 12/28/2013, you were paying for the current fiscal year of 2014, right?
That's correct, yes.
So on this sheet, where was the 600,000 that was due and owing for 2013 that we appropriated money for in June of this year?
Well, when we were paying the current FY 14, those FY 14 overtimes that were appropriated for FY 14, the 668,000 that was approved to pay the FY 13 overtime balance, those monies were going toward paying the FY 13 overtime balance.
I understand,
Yes.
but on this sheet, the only thing that you have from 2013, from FY 2013, which was the 10/6/2012, that was the
Yeah.
beginning of the 2013 period. That's all that's showing here. There's no 600,000 running between 10/1 of 2012 to 9/30 of 2013, showing 600,000 outstanding.
Okay, this FY 2014, the top says Guam Police Department FY 2014 paid an outstanding overtime. I believe, according to Ovi Nauta, who briefed me on this printout, that this isn't reflecting that 668,000 from that was budgeted for, that was passed to pay the outstanding overtime balance for FY 13.
I
So it's
understand
not
that.
reflecting in this sheet.
But why do we only have one entry for 2013 on this sheet?
I'll ask the administrative service officers why it's not reflecting the 668,000 that was passed to pay off the FY 13 overtime debt.
Why isn't she?
Because when we met in June, there should have been nothing outstanding because everything had been paid. You paid the ones for 2012.
721,000.
You were even current. You were paying 2014 October, November,
Yeah.
and December of FY 14. You were paying and had paid 2014, and the only thing that you showed outstanding from 2013 was that 10/1/2012, but there's no 600 on this.
Yeah, I can ask why they don't have the 600 reflected on the Guam Police Department FY14 paid and outstanding. Maybe it might be in a different report.
You started off with a 2013 entry. That was the only one that you had in there. What happened to the rest of the months? What happened to the other 25 pay periods of 2013? Why aren't they on this sheet?
Well, I can follow up and try and find out what's the finance report for that. But I know for FY13, the information I was provided is that they had an outstanding balance of $600-some thousand in overtime owed for FY13 to close the books.
And that's
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
told us, and
yeah.
that's what we appropriated.
Yeah.
But now we're finding today that you only needed 428. So I'm just asking, did we really need 428? Because this sheet doesn't show that you needed
Yeah.
anything for 2013,
Yeah.
except for the 60,000.
Yeah.
I mean, 22,000. Do you understand where your credibility problem is here?
Well, again, I guess, Vice Speaker, I can check with the Administrative Service Officer and find out, is there is there a report that reflects that, where the 400-some thousand?
I understand. This is what you provided us, all right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
When you come to court, when you used to go to court, if you had come in and you had presented this, I would have
Yeah.
thrown you out on your head. And on this sheet, it says at the bottom, 1.9 million in overtime. And then there's 3 other columns there: night differential, hazardous, and retirement. With a grand total of $3,058,000. This 1.5 million that you and the governor are asking from us, how are you going to cover the night differential, the hazardous, and the retirement? You're going to have to pay those, right?
That's correct. In our budget, paying, for hazardous pay and night diff, if any of those individuals from out of that 200, some officers work at night, some of that night diff would be
If
have to
any?
be compensated.
You've listed
Yeah.
in every single one of these columns an amount. It's not an if any.
Yeah.
You've listed a night differential for every pay period,
Yeah.
and a hazardous pay for every pay period,
Yeah.
and a 30% for every pay period that you've listed here.
Yes.
I would imagine that it was for the amount that started out the column of the overtime.
Yes.
I would hope.
Yes. Yes.
So how are we covering the other additional 1.5? It says the grand total is 3 million
Yes.
at the bottom. Am I reading it correctly? 3.3058134444.
That's correct. Yes. The other categories on hazardous pay, night diff, retirement, those benefits are calculated in there are different object categories than the overtime. And I think the issue of what that's being focused on is the actual overtime, amount that is due, and that's why this 1,497,709.23 is the overtime there. How do we intend to pay night diff and hazard and retirement? Those are other object categories in our budget that's budget from the general fund to pay any of that owed to any of these officers that are currently in our department or those that have retired recently.
And
too.
the retirement that we budget for is 30% of what we budgeted for personnel. So if you increase personnel by 1.5 to pay for overtime, we would need the 30% in the retirement. Wouldn't we?
That's correct if you increase personnel, but you hope that as you increase personnel, you reduce overtime because the higher
No,
level
the
of
personnel
officers are- we're
cost by
talking about
paying
too.
this
Yeah.
overtime. By paying this overtime, we're going to have to pay the 30% of retirement. Is that correct?
Yes.
So do you have enough in your retirement account, your hazardous pay and your night differential, to make up that 1.5 million? Or are you going to be back here on election night asking for us to appropriate that because you can't cut the checks?
I think there's there's enough revenue to cover our overtime that we're requesting out of this bill, and in terms of the other revenues that are needed in terms of paying retirement.
But that's we're paying prior year.
But I think
You can't be using this year's for your prior year. You can't use the FY15 retirement 30% to pay for the retirement for the 2014 prior year obligation. So where's that coming from?
Well, I know that with this bill, and it authorizes $1.5 million plus there's balance on the FY13, the 200-some thousand, plus, and this is why I said in the previous hearing about giving the governor flexibility in terms of paying prior debt obligations when necessary to cover full costs of our agency's debt obligations for retirees and everything else.
That's the
It's
same
to
testimony
be-
you gave me at the budget hearing in June, when I kept asking whether or not you would have enough.
But I think, Vice Speaker, we were talking about the FY13 to cover the FY13. We had
No,
more than
we were
enough to cover
talking
that.
about
We even had a
trying to.
balance.
I'm just trying to get you enough money. I just don't want to get to next Thursday and have another bill come over that says we need an additional 1.5 to cover the difference. Because otherwise, the checks aren't going to be able to go out on Friday or on Monday morning in time for the election on Tuesday. On another note, as long as we're trying to deal with pay for all the men and women in blue and the hundreds that you have in your reserve, what is the current situation in your stipends? Is everybody current in the stipend payment?
As I said, we still owe for more stipends for the police reserves. We paid out some. We're looking at to,
How
get
many
current.
months behind are the men and women in blue who are reservists, who you depend on to cover? How many months are they behind in their stipends,
That I
and
will
how
have-
much is owed to
Yeah.
them, so that we can take care of it
Yeah,
today?
that I can get that information for you. I don't have that information now because I was prepared to address this, this bill on the overtime in terms of the,
When can we get that?
can get that by the end of the day.
At
From
the end
the-
of the
yeah,
day, we're
within
trying
the
to deal with this bill.
Yeah.
You went to the governor and you asked him for 1.5. We're trying to get everything you need for the men and women in blue. These group of
Yeah.
14 men and women have been trying to give you money. Madam Chair, can I ask that we recess until 2 o'clock this wait. Okay, well, I really believe that we need to address the reservist. Both you and I have received emails from reservists who have said that their stipends are behind. The good chief has been honest enough to tell us that
Yeah.
they are,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of stipends that haven't been paid. He has not been able to tell me or tell us how many months and how much is necessary to pay that.
Yeah.
If we're going to pay the men and women in blue what they deserve for the work that they do, then I believe that the men and women in blue who are reservists, who don't get retirement, who don't get health insurance, but out of the goodness of their heart are devoting their nighttime and their daytime to assist at a fraction deserve to be made whole today. I don't think any bill should come forth from this legislature until we have the amount that can also make all reservists whole for all of their stipends that have been outstanding to them over the last year. I hope it's only been the last month. But from the emails that I've gotten, some of them are as far back as February. So, Madam Chair, I'm asking that the chief provide us soon after lunch. I don't care if we don't do or don't break, but a listing of all the outstanding stipends that are due to the men and women in blue who are reservists in Cape and whatever other police officers they have out there, that we provide for them, because I am tired of the emails that I'm getting that their stipends aren't being paid.
Okay, so there are two requests that the committee would like to have by 2 o'clock this afternoon. All communications, of course, between yourself or your ASO with the front office in requesting for transferring of funds to be able to deal with your overtime. And then the second request is that amounts, total amounts of stipends that are due to your reservists or any other officers. Is that correct, Mr. Vice Speaker? Okay, and then before I even entertain then a motion to recess so that the chief can provide all of this information, I will go ahead and entertain then comments from Senator San Nicolas and Senator Yamashita.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, just in line of what the retiring speaker was sharing with respect to this spreadsheet,
Yeah.
I quickly did a calculation, and I took the 3,058,134. That's a total here on this spreadsheet, and then I lessed out what you guys have indicated here as paid all the way up until 2013. Because I understand that the bill was intended for overtime.
Yes.
But again, if we're trying to make everybody whole, we need to include the night differential, and we need to include the hazardous, and we definitely don't want to be shortchanging the retirement fund, because we all know what happens when we do that. So when I lessed out the amounts, those totals that have already been paid, the actual amount that you need is $2,337,022. Would you say that amount is accurate? Because right now the request, even with that extra balance, is only 1.7 million.
Yeah.
But if these totals here come out to 2.3 million, then that means that we are already going to be short. I don't You know what makes me very uncomfortable with being short? It means someone's getting paid and someone isn't, you know? So is the amount $2,337,022.11?
If you add in, the night differential, hazardous, and retirement benefits, total amount is 2,336,962.13 according to the overtime submissions that ASO put down. That's if you factor in the night diff, hazardous, retirement. So again, like I said, in there in that figure, the 1,497,709.23 is overtime alone, which was estimated to be fulfilling the overtime obligation owed for FY14. But there's still the night diff, hazardous, and retirement that officers are afforded together with their overtime, which makes that rate higher, you know, to that 2,336,000, which you calculated. at.
Okay, so the amount for FY 2014 is 2.3 million. Now that takes us right back to what I talked about earlier about the FY 2015 budget of 958,000. I mean, I guess that's just for overtime. That doesn't include night differential.
That doesn't include, because there's different object categories for hazardous pay, factoring with each officer, each employee, how much they're, allocated.
So assuming all else being equal, since the number of officers is pretty much static, we could be up to $1,300,000 short for FY 2015 when you factor in overtime, night diff, hazard, and retirement contribution.
Yeah, when you add in the night diff and hazardous and retirement, those are extra costs added on to an officer when they, especially if they're working at night and they're staying back, they not only accumulate overtime, but they included any night diff added percentage to their and their hazardous pay.
So
added in there.
and that amount is, so this difference hasn't been included in the budget that we passed for FY 2015.
For FY 15, in every full-time budget request for our agency, we factor in how much hazardous pay an individual should be accumulating, how much night, and we also have some night differential, I think that's always factored into. But again, what I meant by that's if any, because some officers work day shift, they're not getting night diff for day shift, you know.
But we did
Yep.
have that budgeted for FY 2014.
Yep.
And we were short by 2.3 million for FY 2014, even though that was budgeted for night diff, hazard, and retirement. That was budgeted in the FY 2014 budget also, right?
I believe so, yeah.
But it still came up short when
Yeah, because in FY 14, we were budgeted 697,707 in overtime. That was what our budget, that's what the budget allocated for overtime alone.
for FY 2014.
Yeah, for FY 2014, I believe that the I believe that was what was budgeted for FY 14 according to the ASO who advised me. Now she didn't add in what night diff or hazard, because that would be a higher number there. You know, she added in night diff, hazard, and retirement benefits together with that figure. It would be higher.
Yeah, and it is higher because when you add it all in here, it comes out to 2.3 million short for FY 2014.
Yeah.
Night diff, hazard, retirement contribution, and the overtime.
Yeah.
And so if we have the same number of officers now as we did then, and we only budgeted 958,000 for overtime, then it's possible that we could be up to $1.3 million short when you factor in overtime, night diff, hazard, and retirement contribution for FY 2015.
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay, so we're looking at 2.3 million just for FY 2014, and then for FY 2015, we already have 950,000 budgeted for overtime. So we take 2.3 million and we less out 958, and that's probably how much we might be short for FY 2015 to include hazard, night diff, and retirement. So we may be short 1,378,637 in night diff, hazard, overtime, and retirement for FY 2015. So the total bill that we're looking at for 2014 is 2.3 million. And for FY 2015, to make sure we're not going to just come up short and have these guys waiting again, is another 1.3 million. $2,337,022.11. So we need $3.7 million to cover the FY 2014 that we didn't pay and the likely shortfall we're going to see in FY 2015 if we want to make sure everyone gets paid on time. And that doesn't include the stipends, which like I mentioned earlier, I fully echo with the Vice Speaker. So we also need a projection. I mean, I'm basically going to assume also that whatever we're short on the stipend side for FY 2014 is a projected shortfall for the stipends on FY 2015. And we're going to add all that back into it too. So I just want to put on the record, Madam Speaker, you know, we're going to have to make good on FY 2014, but if we're going to also make good on these employees and have them get paid when they're supposed to get paid, we're going to need to increase the budget by at least another 1.3 million, and that doesn't include the stipend adjustment for FY 2015. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Senator. So actually then, I know you're doing some calculations just based on what's before us, but I think then, Chief, that we would like to get a more accurate figure as well then for the night differential, hazardous, and the retirement pay as well as we project into fiscal year 2015. So
Okay.
we have got 3 requests. Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think accessing the email is going to be simple enough for you. Somebody should be able to go through the email threads and make copies of that as requested. But I'm wondering, because there's nothing worse than saying we're going to be back at 2, but we're not back at 2.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker, may I ask, would we be able to get the reservist information, the reservist information? There was something that was raised on the floor, well, between us about penalties when monies aren't paid. Would we be able to get all of this information as requested by 2 o'clock today? Understanding that your ASO is out today, taking care of issues. I don't, and the other thing, Madam Speaker, is as the chief is representing his budget, which he should, I'm wondering if we need to bring back the Bureau Budget Director and the DOA Director, mostly because these are just amounts of money that seem to be growing, and I would think that they had a handle on this and perhaps a plan, and I don't know those answers. So the questions I pose are, number 1, is there enough time to get the requested information? And number 2, can we bring the directors back who might be able to help the chief actually answer these questions?
Senator Rispish, I'll get your question, but is that
Thank
related to
Yeah,
the
thank
question?
you, Madam Speaker. In addition to what Senator Yamashita just said, I'm also suggesting, like the others have suggested, that we also either bring in customs and quarantine chief or have them be on standby, because if we're doing this so that nobody's left behind, and our commitment to making sure that our law enforcement brothers and sisters are made whole, there's also an issue with customs that we need to address. So if I could just request that this committee of the whole have customs and quarantine officials on standby with the possibility of bringing them into this discussion, which is my hope as well.
My understanding is that the Vice Speaker did put out a request and had actually texted both directors for BBMR and DOA to come back. I know they didn't yesterday afternoon. We will definitely make sure we put the call out as well for this afternoon. And I do know as well is that someone did make the phone call to try to get customs and quarantine in as well to address that. We were waiting for the chair himself, the oversight chair. So the question then left on the table right now, Chief, is that for you to be able to come back by this afternoon, we'll recess and give you some time to be able to come back this afternoon at 2 with all of the information requested by the members of this body.
I believe, our administrative service officer is out early this morning. I think she'll be back in the afternoon. So I think we can get that information by 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Thank you, we appreciate that. And I know that you've alluded to also in the documents that you provided us is that a lot of the information you'll be able to get is from the AS 400. So I'm sure that maybe DOA and BBMR might be able to assist you as well. Mr. Vice Speaker, I know I have you on the list as well.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to put on the record, we have an excellent central staff. All right? They have all the documents that were presented by the chief of police in June. We have the by pay period breakdowns of what we needed, or what they said they needed $600,000 for, which added to $607,328.15. And the reason why I asked about hazardous is because in every single one of their pay periods that they submitted to us in a more detailed breakdown than what they provided us today, this one sheet, they had every pay period that they claimed was outstanding. September 22nd to the 30th, pay period ending September 31st, pay period ending September 7th, August 24th, August 2010, 2013, and it added up to 607. Though they presented us with those documents that to us said they needed 607, so we gave them 668. They're now saying somehow, miraculously, or they were wrong, it was only 428. I really am having problems with any figure that they're going to be coming up with. They provided us, and it was saved by Central, and I just provided it to me. I just wanted that on the record, Madam Chair. That with my prior year, I would have had a fit if police officers came in and testified this way with conflicting testimony.
That is definitely part of the record and the journal, and Chief, of course, everything that you've provided and testified for is also on record. And I think this is an opportunity for you to be able to go back and try to reconcile some of the differences here between what was submitted to OFB, what you're providing, and what also you're getting from AS400. We would like to give you that opportunity to do that this morning and this afternoon. So we will recess until then 3 o'clock this afternoon to give you additional time to provide the information. One more time, we want to make sure again that these requests are all communications to include emails between yourself, your ASO, and the front office in its efforts to request for transfers of money to assist your department in overtime. The second is to also bring in the amounts of stipends that are due to your reservists and possibly other officers, and if possible, also an accurate figure for these officers that are in overtime, to include night differential, hazardous pay, and retirement. And then also this, we would make sure that we contact BBMR director and DOA director to come in to either corroborate your numbers, and not just your numbers, but to include the others, and that hopefully we would have customs and quarantine officials as well to be here this afternoon. So we will, yes. Customs and quarantine, yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just on the issue of customs and quarantine, just for clarification purposes, I understand that we are in the process of addressing continual overtime obligations. There was a court case that was filed in 2011 in which 15 customs officers participated in that court case. They had won their case, and customs was ordered to remit payments to those customs officers who participated in that lawsuit. Customs did meet that obligation and that court order. Now, there are other customs officers who were directly affected by a similar situation. It's just in this case, they were not part and party of the suit that was filed. It is those groups of customs officers that are asking that the equity be applied across the board in terms of making sure that they are also given the overtime in which the court had previously ruled on 15 of their colleagues. So it's not a continuous obligation. We are finalizing the numbers. We're getting the actual court case. I've asked our legal counsel to also please do a little bit of research in regards to this, and I will be proffering an amendment with regards to that in terms of not only the information, the amount that is necessary, and based on discussions with our colleagues, perhaps providing the chief executive the flexibility with proper notification to your office and the chair of finance that that obligation be addressed as part of as an amendment to this legislation. So with customs, they are in the process of generating that information, providing it not only to my office, and then it will be disseminated to yourself and to the rest of our colleagues. But I wanted to ensure that we understood that it is not an obligation that continues to carry one fiscal year. They're not meeting their overtime obligation. It is as a direct result of that lawsuit, and just looking at applying equity across the board, the other customs officers are asking that they also be compensated. And that amount is about a little bit over $100,000. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So the question, however, the request by our members is that for the director to be present also, to be on standby this afternoon. So will you make the call out then for them to be here, just in case they're needed? Okay, so we're going to recess then until 3 o'clock this afternoon. 3 o'clock, okay, to give the chief sufficient time to be able to gather all the information. So we are in recess.